Hello and welcome. Good morning to you, or whenever you are watching this, whatever time of day. We're on to chapter 16 now. It's called Two Paths. And again, this is a short chapter, but this is jam packed with instruction on how to live your life, the code of conduct that you should base all of your thought, speech, and action off of. Reading this chapter for the first time a while back for me was a very reassuring thing because, and if you've been in the program for a while, if you've been in self-inquiry school for a while, you will have known that we have had this lecture in our course, in this version of the course, in the previous version of the course, and even the one before that. So for many years, I've had this lesson inside of our main course about the higher nature and the lower nature. Because as I started walking the spiritual path many years ago, I started to observe this duality within my own mind of this constant battle of the higher nature tendencies of our human character and our lower nature tendencies. And I started to observe in my own spiritual path that the lower nature tendencies have a really strong pull and they are often easier to act on. For example, when anger arises, it is very compelling and it's easier to just be angry and hurt someone. In that moment, it's much harder to act on your higher nature and forgive or let go and understand. But I started to see that even though the lower nature tendencies are easier to act on, when you act on them, they only create suffering and they further bind you into bondage, into experience, into the world. And I started to notice that the more I overcame the pull of the lower tendencies and strived, I tried my hardest to act on the highest nature. In the face of anger, you show understanding and forgiveness. In the face of in the face of pride, you show humility, things of that nature, that you start to ascend on the spiritual path. Even though it's harder and it doesn't make sense to the mind that you should do those things in that very moment, it starts to create simplicity, harmony, clarity, peace in your life. Sometimes the very things that you were trying to achieve with anger, by letting go of anger and acting the opposite of anger, those things naturally become fulfilled. You know, the lower nature is always trying to fight through force, whereas the higher nature fulfills all things without force through power. I have this book in my bookshelf, Power versus Force. I haven't actually ever read it, but it's a very popular book on the spiritual path. But I assume that it's of a similar manner, this book, Power versus Force. It's about how the lower nature strives to accomplish change through force, whereas real power is not forceful, you know. So, you know, after having practiced that through those battles of the higher and lower nature within my own journey already, I started reading I read this chapter in the Gita after a while. So it was very reassuring because this chapter is all about the higher nature and the lower nature and how those are the two paths. One path of the lower nature goes more and more downwards into ignorance and suffering, what Krishna calls the demonic realms. And the higher nature only goes upwards, ascending on the spiritual path. As Krishna describes it in this chapter, it's not limited to this one lifetime. And so this is where the law of karma comes in as well. Although we don't need to go so deeply into that. If that's not something that you resonate with, or sometimes that also gets really too mental for me, and I don't like to go and answer too many questions about it and all that. but it's just a useful model with this. It's like the spiritual work you do in this lifetime is not limited to this lifetime. Okay, so um, the soul in a way picks up where it leaves off. Of course, I don't think that you should like. I think the attitude that you should have in this lifetime is that like you want to complete the journey, the highest goal of life in this lifetime. Don't leave it to the next lifetime in that way. And I'm sure that if you're here, you feel that um, urge, you feel that pull. So, but like discussing it in this way with and bringing in the model of karma and saying that the work that we do is not limited to this one lifetime is also useful. So, without further ado, let's get into it and then we'll talk further about it. So, here, straight away in the first verse, Krishna just starts to give some really powerful instruction. And this is literally like the code of conduct on behalf of which you should live your life. And in the beginning, you may have like, oh, why should I just follow Krishna, what he says, right? Like, you can for yourself observe, experiment and observe how when you actually follow Krishna's advice, it only brings clarity, peace, harmony, and happiness into your life. And then you will not need any faith. So, although I have great faith in Krishna's words, and I really feel that this is the word of God, this is truth, I don't need that faith because I know that through my own practice and that just by experimenting with living in this way, it has brought nothing but happiness, clarity, and peace in my life. So I don't need faith to act on it, but I do have great faith because it just feels very true. So Krishna says, be fearless and pure. Never waver in your determination or your dedication to the spiritual life, right? This is your greatest goal. And on this path, never waver in your determination or your dedication. While you walk this path, be fearless and pure. Give freely, be self controlled, sincere, truthful, loving, and full of the desire to serve. So, in just this simple sentence, so many different instructions. Self controlled. And this is also something the Buddha always says. He says the mind that does what it wants and goes where it wants is it will never understand, will never realize the truth, and will always create only suffering. So in this way, this is what it means by being self-controlled. And always like monitoring this battle between your higher nature and lower nature. Don't just act on impulse, but rather try to act consciously on your higher tendencies rather than your lower instincts. Be self-controlled, sincere, truthful, loving, and full of the desire to serve. Not for being good sake, but because you realize that this is the law of life, that this is the only way it makes sense to be. And it is the only thing that actually creates happiness in your life. Realize the truth of the scriptures. Learn to be detached and take joy in renunciation. Do not get angry or harm any living creature, but be compassionate and gentle. Show goodwill to all. So you see, this sort of way of living is very inclusive, meaning it is not just for the benefit of a particular entity, but rather it is all inclusive. It is universal, universal benefit. Uh, a way of living from oneness for the one. It is this type of behavior is rooted in a much greater identity, universal identity rather than personal identity. From personal identity arises all only selfish motives, the desire for gain for this one. Whereas universal identity, it is all work is done to serve the rest of creation. Everything works to serve each other. And in that, there is the greatest overall benefit for all individual moving pieces. Cultivate vigor, patience, will, purity, avoid malice and pride. So these are the very virtuous qualities. And you will see that, like, you shouldn't need a reason to cultivate these things. You will just see that they are necessary in life. The opposite of them is suffering. If you don't cultivate vigor, patience, will, purity, you will suffer. There's no other way to go about it. And avoid malice and pride. For these, Krishna will also describe later in this chapter, will only bring you downward, will only pollute your mind and your life. Then, Arjuna, you will achieve your divine destiny. Your divine destiny is truth, realization of your true nature. So here he shares right away how to be, how to live. You have to literally make your entire thought, speech, and action your spiritual practice. Purify your thought, speech, and action of all of these lower motives that Krishna is about to describe, and strive towards the qualities he has described in this first 3 verses. So in verse 4, other qualities, Arjuna, make a person more and more inhumane. Hypocrisy, arrogance, conceit, anger, cruelty, ignorance. So these are things you will observe in your own character. Don't be judgmental when you observe and come across the realization that your mind is full of these qualities. It is not for you to judge, it is for you to simply observe and start to let go of reinforcing those qualities by constantly acting on them and trying to defend those mental points of views and positions. Start to observe how when you do act on these qualities, they only create dysfunction and suffering in your life through all the little situations and greater situations. You're not going to be perfect just because you have received this teaching. You're going to have to learn through your day-to-day situations by practicing, experimenting, observing, seeing what creates harmony, what creates more dysfunction, what helps you become free versus what binds you further. Through your own observation, observing is a tool of freedom. It is our instrument for freedom. Through non-judgmental observation, we come to know many things. And even then, when you observe the worst tendencies in your own character, in your own mind, which you will, they won't bind you. You will actually, through your own observation of them, break identification with them. That's the secret. Whatever you come to observe and know, you come to gradually dissolve identification with. Because previously we're not even aware of that we're being this way. We are just doing it. That's just sort of part of our character, and we're identified with that. Through trying to practice this teaching, experimenting, observing its results, we come to know how we were being and the consequences it was creating, how we were actually creating our own bondage and binding ourselves to further and further ignorance. Through that, comes the capacity to not identify, the will to act on the higher nature, to no longer reinforce those lower tendencies, to let go. So we become more and more free. Consider these things: hypocrisy, ignorance, conceit, anger, cruelty, ignorance. Consider these things a web, a very sticky web that if you engage in them, you only get more and more stuck in the web. So the higher nature is like an antidote to the stickiness of the web. When you act on your higher nature tendencies and you move through life making everything your spiritual practice, and you try to purify your entire mind, your thought, speech, and action from all these lower qualities, these impurities, it helps you just slip out of the web. of bondage, of worldly ignorance. So Krishna says in verse 5, the divine qualities lead to freedom and the demonic to bondage. So it's very simply put, one way of life. That's why the chapter is called Two Paths. One way of life only brings you downward. One way of life helps you ascend on the spiritual path. So we should not complain on the spiritual path. Why aren't we getting progress? Or why am I not realizing the things that I see someone else realize? You have your own path. Instead of complaining, do the work. In this Gita, we have encountered so many different ways of spiritual practice. See what resonates with you the most and implement it. Ultimately, strive to apply all of it in some way or degree. And this shouldn't be hard. It's only hard when this isn't the main thing for you in your life, when other things are more important for you, when worldly motives are more important than spiritual growth. So that's why Krishna led with, and the first teaching in this book really was make me your highest goal. Only when the highest goal of your life is spiritual knowledge, self knowledge, truth, God, only then do you gain the power, the capacity, the space to live in this way. Otherwise, worldly motive will keep you stuck in personal identity because you only want things of the world as a person. So desire for anything worldly is itself personal. Therefore, it keeps us in that bondage and stuck in the web of the lower nature. But understand that the world can never give you the happiness that it promises. You know, happiness only comes from spiritual growth. So in verse 6, actually, let's go to verse 7, where Krishna begins to describe the demonic tendencies because he tells he tells Arjuna that, like, hey, I've given you a lot of instruction on how to be. Now, let me also tell you about the demonic tendencies that you need to avoid, to observe within yourself and let go of. The demonic do things that they should avoid and avoid the things that they should do. So the word demonic is quite heavy, right? But notice that, like, it simply means it's not necessarily like dark villains that are crawling around this world. It's the average person. Um, it can be anybody. Mm, and they may even appear to be like a decent average human being, but it's like when like they of course there are varying degrees of the demonic, but like they could also just be an average person who is so full of himself or herself, constantly striving only for personal gain. So the demonic do things they should avoid and avoid the things that they should do. They have no sense of uprightness, purity, or truth. And actually, I do wish to go back to verse 6 because Krishna says some people have divine tendencies, others demonic. And so you'll notice that your own character, and if you're very honest with yourself, you can see, like, okay, what does my character consist of? What are the qualities that I have been sort of naturally endowed with? You don't choose these qualities. You don't choose your personality. It's just sort of like the flavor of your conditioning. So you will have some good, some bad. It's like that for everybody. The degree and like the percentage and the mix you do not control. Just like, so whatever you observe within yourself, it's not for you to judge. For further judgment and feeling bad about it is once again your lower nature at play. Learn to observe without judgment. If you want to ascend and if you want to mix this, you want to like influence this mix in a positive way, if you want to allow the divine tendencies to dominate the demonic, learn to observe without judgment. Self-honesty will set you free. So in verse 8, there's no God, they say, no truth, no spiritual law, no moral order. The basis of life is sex. What else can it be? Holding such distorted views, possessing scant discrimination, they become enemies of the world, causing suffering and destruction. You can just sort of see the state of the world, not just now, but like throughout the ages. So much killing, so much destruction. See that it's because of the ego. It's because of the lower nature that is sort of dominant, you know? And so see in this view, it is like materialism, atheism, or so it's like where we just take life at face value. This is what it is, you know? We fail to see beyond the appearance. So the demonic fail to see beyond the appearance and discern essence. Verse 10, hypocritical, proud, and arrogant, living in delusion and clinging to deluded ideas, insatiable in their desires, they pursue their unclean ends. So you see these qualities to observe within yourself and let go. Hypocritical, proud, arrogant, living in delusion and clinging to deluded ideas, insatiable in their desires, they pursue their unclean ends. By observing these within yourself, they're not just going to go. It takes time. It takes time for you to realize how truly dysfunctional these qualities are and that they promise happiness, but they can never deliver happiness. So little by little, they start to escape your character. Okay. So have patience with yourself. As Krishna says in verse 3, cultivate vigor, patience, will, purity. Those are even necessary to just even walk the spiritual path. Without patience, you cannot walk the spiritual path. In verse 11, although burdened with fears that end only with death, they still maintain with complete assurance gratification of lust is the highest that life can offer. So notice how when we live in ignorance, all that we care for is sensual pleasure, pleasure of the five senses. And in a way, that is what we worship. When the greatest goal of our life is not self-realization, well, what our object of devotion, our object of worship is matter, experience of the senses. That's what lust means here. It's not like sexual only, it is objects of the five senses. And that's what we feel is like the highest that life can offer. That's why we're only chasing the next experience and the next experience. But notice how Krishna says, insatiable in their desires. So the desire for sensual pleasure never ends. It only leads way to the next desire and the next desire. It is a bottomless pit. It can never be satiated. It can never be filled. Who's going to realize that? Only by really walking this path and observing and devoting your life to this wisdom, you will come to realize that. Otherwise, keep going through your experiences. And eventually, if you're lucky, you will also come to these realizations. But after a lot of suffering and conflict. And that's why life is like that. Life is there. Like experience cannot offer you that. Experience is also in a way they're there to help you transcend, you know? So if you don't walk the spiritual path willingly, knowingly, consciously, then you are walking it unconsciously. You will still have to come to these realizations gradually. That's why like everybody grows in their life. No matter how little, they still have to grow in their life and experience helps them grow. Spiritual path, though, helps you accelerate this growth. So in verse 12, bound on all sides by scheming and anxiety. So notice that like no matter or like how powerful or wealthy or how much they have amassed in their life, the the people who are seriously just only living for the next sensual pleasure, they are constantly bound on all sides by scheming and anxiety. Even when they have everything, they are still lost in fear, anxiety, scheming for the next thing. Driven by anger and greed, they amass by any means they can a hoard of money for the satisfaction of their cravings. I got this today, they say. Tomorrow I shall get that. This wealth is mine, and that will be mine too. I have destroyed my enemies. I shall destroy others too. Am I not like God? I enjoy what I want. I am successful. I am powerful. I'm happy. I am rich. I am well born. Who is equal to me? And if you observe your ego, if you observe the mind, that is what it is. The ego wants to play God. It wants to be like God. It wants to be all powerful. It wants everything to bend to its will. It wants to get everything, all the satisfaction, all the fulfillment. It wants the world to act in alignment with what it wants at the snap of its fingers now. Otherwise, I will not be happy. I will suffer. So see that that's what ego is. It is the notion that I am the doer. It is just the feeling that I am the maker of the world. I am the creator. So that's what it wants in life. It wants whatever it wants. And it wants to feel all powerful. So that's why it's never happy, regardless of what you get. Because regardless of what you get, the world will never fully comply with this feeling that you have that you should have everything that you want. And that's also beautifully designed that way because experience has to constantly help you realize that you are not the doer, that you are not the creator, you are not the controller of everything. Otherwise, you will really feel like God. So experience has to contradict that feeling because you are not that. You are not, you are not like in our idea of ourselves as a person, we are not the creator. So, but you can see this attitude in like a lot of the dictators in the past and the world leaders in the past. It was all about conquering. It was all about, achieving their ends, feeling powerful, feeling like, God. So it's interesting to observe that about even your mind to whatever degree. So in verse 16, bound by their greed and entangled in a web of delusion, whirled about by a fragmented mind, they fall into a dark hell. So no matter how much you hoard and acquire and attain and achieve in this life, without spiritual truth, you'll be bound in greed and entangled in a web of delusion. Observe that for your own self. Self-important, obstinate, swept away by the pride of wealth, right? The feeling, I did this, I achieved this. They ostentatiously perform sacrifices without any regard for their purpose. So you've seen many wealthy people, they they even give and perform sacrifices only to like, as Krishna says in verse 15, to rejoice in their own generosity, their apparent generosity. In verse 18, egotistical, violent, arrogant, lustful, angry, envious of everyone. They abuse my presence within their own bodies and the bodies of others. So, very powerful statement by Krishna here is that when we act on our lower nature, we abuse Krishna's presence in our body and in others. the presence of truth, the presence of self, the presence of God. Whereas acting on your higher nature, you are honoring God's presence within yourself and in everything else. And that sort of action will help you ascend. So in verse 19, life after life, I cast those who are malicious, hateful, cruel, and degraded into the wombs of those with similar demonic natures. So, right, it's not limited to just this lifetime. Birth after birth, they find themselves with demonic tendencies. Degraded in this way, Arjuna, they fail to reach me and fall lower still. So you can, in a very practical way, you can see this as a ladder. The lower nature will only drag you down the ladder, and the higher nature will only help you ascend. So this is very good instruction on the path of even self-inquiry, which is very contemplative and meditative. You know, in the world, like no matter how much meditation you do and everything, this is your code of conduct in the world. Then it will help you accelerate on both fronts. When you act this way in the world, it will help your meditation deepen. And when your meditation deepens, it will naturally cleanse the mind of all these impure qualities and bring purity, truth, harmony. Acting on your higher nature will not be like so hard of a thing to do. It will just feel natural because once again, through meditation and through acting in this way, your identity expands more and more. In verse 21, there are three gates to this self-destructive hell: lust, anger, and greed. So these are, if Krishna just categorizes all of these different qualities under just these three buckets: lust, anger, and greed. Lust is desire for sensual pleasure. Anger is when things don't go your way. And greed is the consequence of lust. The more you desire, the more you desire. Desire only leads to more desire or anger. Either way, it's bondage. Realize that and free yourself. Live only for truth, not for things or people or achievements. They are all superficial. They are all passing fortunes. Verse 22. Those who escape from these three gates of darkness, Arjuna, seek what is best and attains life's supreme goal. Others disregard the teachings of the scriptures. Driven by selfish desire, they miss the goal of life, miss even happiness and success. So when you don't act, when you don't follow the path, when you don't live for the truth, then not only do you miss the goal of life, but you even miss happiness and success. So no matter how happy and successful the demonic appear to be, inwardly they are living in hell, constantly filled with greed and anxiety and lust and anger. So never be fooled by that. Never compare yourself to others. Even for true worldly success, our only way to even achieve that and be happy is follow the spiritual path. On the spiritual path, whatever you are given, find contentment with. There's this quote on my wall from the Ashtavakra Gita, who also, there's two chapters in the Ashtavakra Gita which are so powerful. One is about dispassion, vairagya, like non-attachment, and one is on desire. I forget exactly which one this quote is from, but I'll read it out to you because it is relevant here. Ashtavakra says, striving and craving for pleasure and prosperity, these are your enemies. Let them all go. And then there's another one. Rare is he and blessed who observes the ways of men and gives up the desire for pleasure and prosperity and knowledge. For life itself, nothing lasts, nothing is real. It is all suffering. Know this and give it up. Be still. Let go of all contraries. Whatever comes, be happy, and so fulfill yourself. So you can hear it from sages all you want, but ultimately we all have to realize this ourselves, that happiness is not the byproduct of experience, of sensual pleasure. Experience can only offer you momentary pleasure, fleeting pleasure. Happiness comes only through contentment with what is. It's that simple. Whatever comes, let it come. Find contentment in that. Whatever goes, let it go. Find contentment in what is. Happiness comes through the acknowledgement, the true realization of impermanence. That's why the Buddha taught one of his main teachings is observe the impermanence in all things. Only through observing impermanence in all things, world, body, and mind, do we really have a shot at true happiness and clarity. So, last verse. Therefore, let the scriptures be your guide in what to do and what not to do. Understand their teachings, then act in accordance with them. So, these scriptures who have been, they have held their own over thousands of years. The world will continue to change, all of experience will continue to change, but the truth is one. And these teachings will be as relevant in 10,000 years as they are now, regardless of the state of the world and how different it is, because ultimately the essence will never change. Only the appearance, the surface changes. Okay, so let's cover today's main points. Hope you enjoyed this chapter. I certainly did. It's one of my favorites. So, chapter 16, two paths. So, we all have two natures, the higher and the lower. Succumbing to your lower nature brings you downwards on the spiritual path. Striving to act through your higher nature helps you ascend. See it as a ladder, if you will. And you have to observe that in your own life when you act on both, because just by going through this chapter, it's not like your lower nature will stop functioning. You will notice it arise again and again and again. It will pollute your mind, your worldview, your how you see the current situation before you. And sometimes you will act on it. It's fine. Never feel guilty, never judge. Simply observe yourself going through all of it, the higher and the lower, and see what creates harmony and happiness and what creates dysfunction and suffering. That's the only way. And then the lower nature will cease to be reinforced. The higher nature will become easier and easier to act on and live by. It will become the way you are. It's not going to be something you practice. Only in the beginning is this something we practice. Gradually, it just becomes what we are. So the lower nature will drag you down further into ignorance and suffering. The higher nature will bring you spiritual growth, clarity, understanding, harmony, and peace. And so this is also your spiritual compass. The way like it helps you navigate personal life also and spiritual path. Do more of what brings you clarity, understanding, simplicity, harmony, peace. Do less of what brings you down, makes you only suffer and makes you entangled in the web of desire and anger and lust. Knowing the goal of life and striving towards it, act according to your higher nature, even though it is often difficult. Notice that you can only do this work if your highest goal, your main goal in life is spiritual realization, self-realization. Otherwise, you will not lack. Otherwise you will lack the power to act on your higher nature, even though the pull of your lower nature is so strong, because the lower nature is focused in trying to find worldly satisfaction now. Is trying to change worldly conditions now through force, and it seems practical to the mind right now, but it only creates pain and suffering. So you will only be able to overcome the pull of your lower nature if your greatest goal in this life is God, self-realization. So it says here, the lower nature tendencies promise happiness, but they are incapable of delivering it. So see that they are never able to deliver what they promise. They only bring you the opposite of what they actually promise. And know well that your happiness does not lie in the world, but instead in ascending on the spiritual path. Just like the lower nature that promises you happiness cannot bring you happiness, that just like that experience cannot deliver happiness. It can only deliver you fleeting pleasure for this moment, always leaving you in lust for the next. So that is constant restlessness. Observe that within yourself. It's vital if you want to grow spiritually. Happiness only comes from ascending on the spiritual path, growing more and more clear in your true nature of peace. And live your life by these teachings completely. Give your all to them, make this your main goal. Consider this your spiritual compass. All right. Hope you enjoyed that chapter. Have a good day.